Welcome to the Divorce Mortgage Strategies, brought to you by the Divorce Lending Association, where clarity meets strategy in the financial side of divorce. I'm Amy Valdivia, and I'm honored to be your host today. Whether you're a family law professional, a financial expert, or someone navigating the complexities of divorce yourself, this podcast is your go-to resource for trusted insight into how real property and mortgage financing intersect with divorce outcomes. We don't just talk about houses, oh no. We talk about strategic solutions that protect our futures. Let's dive right in. Today, I have a great guest who understands everything I just said, all about the complexities and how we're all intertwined. I'm here today with Master Credentialed Collaborative Family Law Attorney, Miss Lisa Marquee. Yay!
Hi,
Welcome,
Amy.
welcome, Lisa. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm honored to be here. I'm glad to be sharing this afternoon with you and your listeners.
Well, thank you once again. And please, for our listeners, tell us a little bit about who's Lisa and what's this title, Master Credentialed Collaborative Divorce Attorney? What does that mean?
Well, I am a family law attorney, obviously. I am a shareholder with a firm in Dallas called Quilling Sealander, and I've been doing family law for 31 years. And back in 2000, I took my first collaborative training and have been hooked ever since. And I think I always kind of approach family law cases with that mindset because family law deals with such personal aspects of clients' lives. And I just had my second child, and I remember thinking, man, if anything ever happened, the last person I would be wanting to make a decision about my children and my property is a man or a woman in a black robe who hears maybe a couple of hours of information and has to make a decision.
Right.
And so I found out about collaborative law, and I thought, oh, this sounds fabulous. And when it first started, collaborative law in Texas, anyway, was really we just did a team of an attorney-only model, right? So there was each side had their own attorney, and we would sit in the room together, believe it or not, divorcing spouses sitting across the table from each other, sometimes next to each other, and we would help them navigate this process. And then we started realizing that, wow, there's so much more benefit we could bring to our clients by bringing in other professionals with different areas of expertise. And so the team approach in Texas, and I believe California uses a similar model with a few little tweaks that are different, but we typically have on our team, besides the two attorneys, we will have a financial professional, and that in that particular role, the financial professional is helping to gather all the data related to the assets and liabilities, also helping the clients to prepare post-divorce budgets, because those are really important as they navigate decisions. And then we typically also have a mental health professional. And in that role, that mental health professional is not there as a therapist. They're not there to repair the relationship. They are there to, as a communications coach, to help all of us better communicate, to help the parties, the clients, learn better communication skills so that as they're raising their children, they have, because whatever they were doing up to that point wasn't working. So let's see how we can help them do better next time. And then also as a parenting coach to help them determine what their parenting plan should be. And then we started realizing that it's such a different approach because we are all on the same team. We are working for these clients to help them get to a resolution that is best for their entire family. And we started noticing that there are other professionals that we still needed to bring in just on a more itemized basis. So for example, we would, if a house is going to be kept by one of the spouses and needs to be refinanced, then we need a mortgage person to come in and help share with us and educate all of us on what are the options. Because believe it or not, lawyers don't know everything, right? I mean, we have our lane, but everybody else has their areas of expertise. And so our preference is to bring in these professionals that are familiar with the collaborative model as well, because another very common one that we bring in is a business valuation expert. Look, if you've ever seen any litigated divorce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Husband goes and gets the business valuated by his expert. Wife gets valued by her expert. And then there's the battle of the experts, right? And they're all very defensive and justifying their numbers. So we started looking for experts in these different areas that also were collaboratively trained so that they understood that the goal was that they were representing both clients, right? The idea isn't to win, it's to come up with the right answer. What is the right valuation of this, being as objective as possible? And even in house situations, value is always subjective, right?
Right.
And so, but where it wasn't, us versus them, it was really what is the right answer for these clients. And so all I can tell you is when we get through this process, and they're not all easy, it is not kumbaya. We're not sitting around holding hands. There are some that are tougher than others, but we can genuinely feel like we have helped this family, get the most custom-made solution as possible for their family post-divorce. And really with a very big focus on the kiddos, right? Because the parents are going to be the parents, whether they're married to each other or not.
Right.
And so we want to try to protect that relationship. And really that's where the mental health professional can come in, is in helping them be better at interacting with each other. The children not being, oh my gosh, what happens if mom shows up? What happens if dad shows up? And so that's a piece where I feel like we genuinely can help these families.
Let me ask you this question. In this approach,
Okay.
there are multiple professionals that you bring in. Let's talk about that mental health professional.
Okay.
When the divorce is final, does that relationship end?
So that's a really good question. The mental health professional is the only neutral. And by the way, we call the financial professional and the mental health professional and any of these other experts that we bring in, we call them neutrals, with the intention that they are not picking sides, right? They are neutral to the process. That is the one person that can stay involved with the family on a limited basis post-divorce, and that is as their parenting coordinator. And it's worked beautifully to keep people from having to come back into court or back into the process to change things, because there's going to be bumps along the way, especially if you get divorced and your kids are 8 and 12. When they're 6 or 14 and 17, there's whole different issues that are going
It's a
on, right?
completely different than what the divorce settlement laid out to begin with, right?
That's right. That's right. And so it is an avenue for these folks to go back and sit down and talk to somebody that already knows their story, right? I mean, they were in the case and they know the story, and just to be available for them. But other than that limited role, the financial neutral, they cannot give any financial advice post-divorce. They can't, if they happen to be a CPA, they can't prepare tax returns. They can't do those kind of things. And the idea behind that is to maintain the neutrality. So they're not looking at what other business might they gain, after the case is over. And for us lawyers, in order to make sure that we are, as we're not neutral. I have to say that we are not neutral. We are still advocates for our clients, right? There's still an attorney-client privilege, but there's a lot when those meetings take place and we're all sitting around the table together. You want to encourage the free flow of information, and if a client is sitting there afraid that I may someday cross-examine them on the stand about whatever they're about to say, they're not going to be as forthcoming. And all of these negotiations are confidential, right? So as settlement negotiations are always confidential, all of these meetings are confidential. And so if either of the parties decide, you know what, so much for all this collaboration stuff, I'm going to let the judge decide, then both lawyers have to withdraw from the case because we have information that could be potentially harmful, and it would defeat the purpose of trying to encourage that transparency. And so that is one of the hallmarks, at least I believe all the states do this that have a collaborative law statute. But in our statute, in order for it to be collaborative, that provision has to be in there.
And those that are the financial neutrals, they're not, they'd have to start all over.
Right. The one thing I will say is that the information that's gathered, right? So let's say the financial neutral has gathered bank statements, tax returns, that kind of stuff. That information can all still be turned over. I mean, that's the client, those are the client's documents.
Right.
But the work product itself is still protected by this privilege, right? So and when cases, and unfortunately sometimes they do, we call that an opt-out, when somebody decides they want to go the litigation route, then there's very specific rules about what we as the lawyer can share with the litigation lawyer, and what information created in that collaborative process in the course of those meetings is protected from disclosure.
So you just brought up a key point that I want to make sure that we're sharing with the listeners out there. Every divorce is unique. And the buzzword these days is an amicable, right? Let's have an amicable divorce. Let's be friendly. Let's do our very best not to hurt the kids. Coming from this approach, as divorcing homeowners are looking around trying to figure out who should we work with and why and how, what would you give as your best bit of advice? What heads up would you give?
Oh, just one thing? That's hard. I think, as you mentioned, every case is so incredibly different. And there are some people who they've been married a short period of time, they don't have any children, they don't have any property. They don't need the bells and whistles of this, right?
Right.
But there are families who they know they want to do the right thing, they just don't know how to get there. And as you can imagine, divorce is very emotional, right? Super emotional. And our job, the whole team, our job is to make sure that emotion isn't driving the decisions and the conversation, right? They certainly, we know it's there. And one of the things with collaborative is that we'll tell people, and this may be a good takeaway for your specific question, is the past is the past. If you really want to move on, you need to look forward. There's you you can blame the other spouse for whatever you want to blame them for, but does that really help you move forward? Does that really
Right.
help your children move forward? And we're constantly looking at being aware of where people are in their level of emotions. I mean, there's some, we all have bad days, right? There are just some days that we should not be making major life decisions. And so one of the best parts about having the mental health professional on the team is they know way more about that body language than lawyers do, and certainly more than, no offense to financial neutrals, but more than the financial neutrals do, right? I mean, they're numbers people. And so we're always sensitive to how every bit of that plays into how a meeting is going to go, how a case is going to go. But at the end of the day, I mean, there are some people that their definition of amicable is different than what I might define as
Right,
amicable.
right.
For example, this was years ago, I had somebody come in, well, it's agreed. And I said, well, what's agreed? He goes, well, we both want the divorce. I'm like, well, That's only a very small piece of what we have to deal with.
That's a good starting
So
point.
it's a good starting point, but it's not the whole thing.
Right, right. So it, we talk about that, the starting point, and we talk about, okay, what's next? And it reminds me of a divorce coach that I interviewed, and she often says, I prepare you for the business of divorce because it is so emotional. And oftentimes, when I'm talking to divorcing homeowners, I say, you know, there's so much to your home, and we have such great attachment. The story we talk about all the time is the Christmas tree in the same window for the last 25 years, right? And we can't move past that. We could save a lot of money if we focus on getting through the emotion first and then begin negotiations, as opposed to negotiating while in the emotional state.
100%. Absolutely right.
Eh,
Absolutely right. And a lot of times when the clients meet with a mental health professional, one of the things they're assessing is what we call divorce readiness.
right. There you
Where
go.
are they in that process, right? And it's and everybody moves at a different pace. That's the other beauty of this process. We can acknowledge that and let people process information the way they need to process information. We frequently will have a case where one person is instant decision making. I mean, they're on. They know how their spouse makes decisions. They always know. And so that's part of the conversation. How does your spouse make decisions? Well, they need to hear it, process it, talk it through, and so forth. And and the beauty of this process is people get the chance to make decisions the way they are
Mm,
used to making decisions, and with the added benefit of that support system there, to the financial neutral to help explain the need for the budget, right? The mental health professional to explain the developmental stages, and yes, your child is really going to be okay if they spend 3 nights in a row with dad, right? So
well, and so let's dive deeper into that area, because in some families, one party seems to be the decision maker, and the other party just kind of follows suit or may have an opinion and kind of throw their 2 cents in. But for all intents and purposes, the way their family dynamic has been made up is maybe the husband, he generally took the lead, and the wife just
right.
kind of follows suit. Well, if they know that that's how they tick, husband might walk into negotiations saying, okay, so this is what we're going to do. How do you break the wife from, maintaining status quo? No, no, you're going through a divorce. You have to make your own decision. How do you change that?
So actually, interestingly enough, that happens a lot. But really the approach is to, and we'll use your husband-wife dynamic there, is to, for the lawyer of the husband to say, stop. There is a process. We have what we call the roadmap to resolution, right? And there is a process. And we're always I mean, the idea is that people come into that process with an open mind about what options work, what options don't work. And you don't get to option development till you've gone through information gathering and all these other stages, right? And so and it is incumbent on the lawyer for that spouse to help them slow down. It's
There you go.
really, it's a matter of them slowing down and then making sure the other spouse understands, look, you are not going to be asked to make a decision until you have all the information you feel that you need in order to make that decision, right? So it's kind of a two-step process, but it really starts with slowing down the person who walks in with a spreadsheet and says, well, this is a fair deal. And I'll be like, turn it over. We're not doing that. It may be the greatest deal on the planet, but until your wife has the chance to process it and realize that her immediate knee-jerk reaction is going to be no, because you're saying that that's what you want to do. And so that's really where that starts. That happens very frequently. The only thing I would add to it is we sometimes have the reverse dynamic of that on the kid related issues, right? Because if dad's been out working, mom's been staying at home, or just been the primary caregiver, even if she is working, she's used to making those decisions,
Right.
right? And when the husband comes in and says, well, no, I want this time with them. Well, what do you mean? That you can't do that. They have soccer and this and that. And like,
That's
well,
not
I'm
how
a
we've been
dad.
doing this for the last
I,
20 years. Right.
right. So we see that is the most typical division of duties, if you will. And so both of them need education in terms of, on the financial side, the wife sometimes needs extra education, extra time with that financial neutral to make sure she understands. And sometimes she also needs education from the mental health professional to say your child will be okay, that
Right.
they will be okay.
You said you advocate for your clients. And it seems like not only are you the advocate for your client, at the same time, you have to now turn your hat just to the side and play mediator. Okay,
Mhm.
everybody slow down, stop. We're going to process this through, because it can't just be we're going to follow the status quo of, in that example, the husband continuing to make the decisions and the wife just to follow suit. So both attorneys, the advocates for each side, need to be able to pivot, for lack of a better term, in the
And I would say
negotiation.
this, that may be a better way to understand it, because it is a paradigm shift for lawyers.
Yes.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. It is a matter of understanding. So, and I forgot to mention this at the very first meeting, each client comes to that first meeting with what their big picture macro goals are,
Mhm.
and so that is how we know where we need to guide this family, right? How do we accomplish and achieve as many of these goals as possible? And so what we're really advocating for is the family. We're both advocating for the family to get to the best place possible. There's going to be change. There's has to be change, right? They're getting
Right.
divorced. There's going to be two. There has to be change. But how can we minimize the trauma from that change? And really, I mean, because every lawyer you talk to knows that sometimes they have the client that's the jerk. I mean, that just,
Yeah,
we
it's
don't all have perfect clients,
the luck
right?
of the draw.
And in collaborative, I think we're more willing to own that. We're more willing to recognize that, yes, our client is a bit difficult. Let's have a conversation and see what we can do to get this back on track. And it's not about, shaming them or anything like that. Is people have gotten used to making decisions a certain way. And
Right.
our job is to maybe help them learn a different way to make decisions. Because that saying, what is that saying? The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing, expect a different result, right?
Right.
So you've been doing things this way and you're getting divorced. Maybe, just maybe, we should relook at a different way to do it
Right.
to help your post-divorce relationship.
You made a comment, it's a paradigm shift for the attorney.
Mhm.
It really is, because originally you're trained, correct me if I'm wrong, litigious. We're going to litigation. And now all of a sudden you're having to make that shift to change the way you were taught to practice. So with that said, now you're the client. What should they look for when they're selecting their attorney?
I think the main thing to look for is, number one, an attorney who's going to let you tell your story, let you get it out, but then be very realistic with you as to what does that translate to in the legal realm, right? So here's an example. And I don't want to downplay this, but we hear with the whole Coldplay thing, it's kind of ripe for conversation, right? I mean, there are people that, my husband's having an affair. I should get 90% of the estate and he should never see the kids again. Well, that's not the reality. That's not going to happen. And I don't care how good of a litigator you are, that's not going to happen because there's guardrails that say that certain things can't happen. And I've always believed that it was incumbent upon me to make sure my clients had a realistic idea of what they could expect. Not a guarantee, no lawyer's ever going to give a guarantee, but they need to be looking at somebody who's maybe challenging some of their thoughts, right? You don't want a yes man as your lawyer. You want somebody who's going to be honest with you about what can you possibly hope to achieve, because divorce is expensive. And you you could spend a whole lot of money and
Right.
somebody could tell you all the things that you want to hear, but when it push comes to shove, the law is the law. And where collaborative steps into that void is, yes, the law is still the law, but we can be as creative as the clients are willing to be. And when you've got a collaboratively trained lawyer who has, I mean, any lawyer who's done family law for any length of time, we've seen lots, whether they're collaboratively trained or not. We've seen lots of things work and some things that don't work. And so, having an attorney with some experience who can say, well, that may sound good in theory, but in reality, these are the things that we've seen not work for clients or where the pitfalls have been. And so looking for someone who can walk you through different options, and honestly that you feel comfortable telling your life story to, because we get into all of it. I mean, it's some hard conversation sometimes,
Right.
but you have to be comfortable telling your lawyer all the hidden secrets, because that is the worst thing you can do, is have your attorney not know what's really going on.
Two questions. First of all, why? Well, dive deeper in this master credentialed, because I could go
Okay.
to any attorney that says I'm a collaborative divorce attorney. So what's the difference with master credentialed? And then segue into talk about the divorce team and the
Okay.
professionals and the need for strong professionals specificity, if I could get that word out there, because again, going alongside your master credential.
So yeah, so master credentialed is it's a designation given through Collaborative Divorce Texas, which is the nonprofit organization that really is helping to promote the practice of collaborative law in the state of Texas. And to get credentialed, we have credentialed collaborative professionals, and that applies to the neutrals as well as the lawyers. And then we have master credentialed. And the biggest difference between those is the number of cases that have been handled, and then also continuing education as well as involvement in leadership, either in your collaborative practice group or at the state level. And so I became master credentialed in 2020. And I will tell you, it was probably the hardest application I've ever filled out in my entire life, because
Really?
it was a lot hard, maybe the wrong, it was very time consuming. So there's a lot of information we had to gather. So master credentialed, you have to have completed at least 50 collaborative cases when you apply.
Okay.
You have to, I don't even remember all the details about how much CLE you have to have, but you have to have gone to at least 3 of the last 5 spring conferences. You have to have basic training, advanced training, and a certain number. And then every 5 years, we have to renew
Right.
our credentialing. And so we have to show that we are continuing to do the educational component of it. And like I said, that applies to, because it's a number of cases you've been on, whether you've been on that case as an attorney or as a financial neutral or as the mental health professional. And so that's what that credentialing means. And I forgot what your second question was.
It was about the team, the strong team around you. Let's talk
Okay,
about
very, very,
specificity.
thank,
And I keep stumbling over this word. My goodness, the audience is going to say, can she speak? and why you choose those professionals to surround yourself with.
So the way that the selection of the team typically works is the clients have come in and met with the attorneys. And the attorneys then have a conversation and say, yes, this case could be good for collaborative, right? And there's different ways that we get the other spouse to go talk to a collaborative attorney. And in that conversation, the two attorneys will talk about the personalities of the clients, the ages of the clients, the issues that need to be that we think might be a little bit more difficult. And then we talk about who of the neutrals do we think would be a good fit for that. But what I want to go back, take one step back and say this: we are really trying to spread the word about collaborative. And what I've tried to do, and I think what a lot of other lawyers in my position have tried to do, is we sometimes have cases where the other spouse has hired a lawyer who maybe is not collaboratively trained. And depending upon the trust relationship with that lawyer, I'm always willing to have one newbie on a team. As long as I have the other two professionals with experience, because a three-legged stool can stand, right? So as
Right.
long as we have three of us that are experienced, and I mean very experienced, then I'm happy to have an untrained lawyer on the other side, if based on their reputation, right? I mean, it's not a science, right? But I'll tell you one happy story, and it was a situation where a former associate of mine was representing the other spouse, and there was a special needs child involved, an adult special needs child. And I knew from the get-go it needed to be collaborative, because there's just so many moving parts in dealing with that, making sure, we don't mess up her benefits, and making sure the trust language is right and all that. And I knew this attorney. She'd worked for me. We'd known each other for a long time, and her client was interested in collaborative. And I said, I'll walk you through it. So we got our two neutrals, were very experienced. And what I would do with this attorney is we'd have side conversations that clients were not getting billed for, but just so I could kind of prepare her for, kind of what to expect in the meeting, and, what the expectations are for it, to help her with that paradigm shift. Some lawyers are they're already wired this way, right? I mean, and I want to say this very clearly. There's a lot of good lawyers out there who help their clients come up with resolutions without going to court, that just don't do it under the formal collaborative model. And I do a lot of cases that way that are through the informal settlement process. But I think there are certain situations that are families that are uniquely helped by the process. But we've learned over the years that you cannot put a square peg in a round hole. And we have to be mindful of the red flags that may indicate that a case is not appropriate for collaborative before we force the clients down that path.
Talk about on-the-job training. That attorney should say thank you 100 times over, because she could or he could have completely botched it. That's the only term that comes to mind for that particular client. So kudos to you for taking that person under your wing to give them that on-the-job training for sure. Well,
Yeah.
you started to go down the path for my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because I know that was a great case. But tell me one of the most memorable cases that you had, that you worked on, that made you kind of sit back and go, this is why I chose this path.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Besides the one I mentioned, the other one that sticks out in my mind is it was an older couple. Their children were adults. They were young adults, but their daughter had some severe addiction issues. And in the middle of the process, and I think they'd been separated for a little while, but had just never gone down the divorce path. But in the middle of the process, their daughter OD'd, and they had to rush down to help her. She's in the hospital. I mean, all these things are going on, and In a litigation case, when you have a hearing, I mean, you could certainly get it moved, right? I mean, judges would, well, maybe not these days because everybody's so concerned about dockets, but typically, something like that, some extenuating
Right.
circumstance, our judges are going to say, take care of your kid, right? But we were able in that case, really, we put a 6-month pause on the
Oh,
divorce
wow.
so they could go and be together. And they already were decent co-parents. I mean, but there was certainly some value in the conversations they'd had with the mental health professional and being on the same team because we knew the addiction was there from the beginning, right? So the mental health professional had already started working with them on how to best communicate and deal with these issues. And so I always felt honored that we were able to give that family the space that they needed to get that child healthy instead of feeling like, well, I have to go through with this now, or
Right.
I'm going to have to stop the divorce and start over down the road. Right. And
Right.
so that is one that always sticks with me as the the biggest example of being able to let people control and handle their family situation in the midst of a divorce and not force it to be an either or.
Yes, that's beautiful. As opposed to cha-ching, 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 as their bill with their litigious attorney just continues to skyrocket.
Well, because in defense of the litigation lawyers, right? I mean, if the case is staying active, there's deadlines, there's discovery, there's all these things
Yes,
that have to
yes,
happen, and they have to keep moving forward because once you have a scheduling order, you're stuck with those dates. So, but we had the benefit of not having those deadlines. So we literally, the folder goes in the file. They're not being billed anything. I mean, obviously, if they called us with something, they would be, but we're literally able to set that aside and not worry about those deadlines. And I think that I'd like to think that gave the parents some peace of mind in that they could legitimately focus on that and not worry about what was happening back here with the divorce.
well, I hope the listeners are just completely having their mind blown like I am, because when we first had our first talk, I thought this is exactly what our listeners need to hear about. Because when I talk about what a CDLP brings to the table and how we work with attorneys and we collaborate and we, offer our support to mediation, for example, where we sit on behalf of the client or clients, because sometimes a couple will come and say, can you help both of us? Okay. So before I wrap this thing up, I want to hear from your perspective. Tell me your perspective about working with a CDLP.
So to me, the critical part of a CDLP is number one, understanding the emotions that are going on, right?
Mm.
This isn't the same as, yay, this is our first house, we're going to get a mortgage and everybody's happy, right? That's really not what you're dealing with. I mean, because there's the underlying piece of, there may be some bitterness over who's getting the house and so forth.
Right.
Secondly, is just being aware that it it's not a win-lose proposition, right? I mean, the idea is there is there's an asset and it's a hard asset, and one person wants is going maybe going to keep it, and the other person needs their share out of it. And being creative in terms of different ways of making that happen so that it's not a one size fits all, and taking into account the other financial needs, and because a lot of times estates may look large, right, but they're not very liquid, and so sometimes we have to find a way to make liquidity to make
Right.
the rest of the math work. And then there's the being able to have the hard conversations, right? I'm sure you have these conversations with clients of, okay, I know you want to keep the house, but you're going to owe this person this, and then you're going to have child support and this and this. So we need to think about, can you really afford this house?
Exactly.
And sometimes that's, I have a lot of mom clients who feel an emotional attachment and want to keep the house.
Yes.
And so, I rely on the folks in your position to be as realistic with my client as I'm trying to be with
Right.
them, that this may not be, this is how it could happen, but this may not be the best financial decision for you.
Right.
And that's where I think having that open dialogue with the lawyers and understanding, you know, for us to understand what this is really going to look like for the client on the other side. Um, and just, you know, going back to what we started this conversation with, not making emotional decisions. These are business decisions. And that sounds crass, and I don't mean to sound so harsh, but
That
these are
is true.
business decisions.
They really are. So there is emotion in divorce, and it's super hyper important to surround yourself with the appropriate professionals that understand that and will help you to make the appropriate decisions while you're not in an emotional state. And
Correct.
so there's life after divorce as opposed to continual victimhood, right?
That's right. That's right.
Where can the world find Miss Lisa Marquee?
Well, so I'm with Quilling Sealander. You can find me via email at lmarquee@qslwm.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And you can also go to collaborativedivorcetexas.com and find my information there. And lots of other good information there if you're interested in learning more about the collaborative process or becoming one of our allies.
Oh, thank you so very much. Before I let you go and we wrap up this segment, tell me, do you have one final thought for the day that you'd like to leave with all of the listeners?
What I would say is this, not to minimize the difficulty of divorce, but if you find yourself going through a divorce, just remember it's really a matter of transitioning to a new normal and redefining your family, not necessarily obliterating your family.
Well said. Thank you so very, very much. And to those of you in the audience listening to this podcast, thank you so very much for joining us today on the Divorce Mortgage Strategies podcast powered by the Divorce Lending Association. If today's conversation with Miss Lisa Marquee, my goodness gracious, if that brought you some clarity, insight, or inspiration, please, we encourage you to subscribe to us, to share this episode with others in your circle, and reach out to her. We will have her contact information in the notes section. For more resources or to connect with a CDLP in your area, you can go to the divorcelendingassociation.com and we will have all that information right there for you. Until next time, remember, in divorce, the mortgage isn't the problem, it's the plan. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.